Humans have existed for about 300,000 years and played a huge role in their environment in a positive, sustainable way. They grew and killed only what they could eat, and they did it sustainably. Gradually over most of that time, or gradually until less than a century ago, humans somehow became separate from their landscape and environment, and they began extracting more than what was needed. Small sustainable farms became overrun by industrial agriculture. Now the farms in the middle of the United States are mostly monoculture crops or single crops to feed cows and livestock stuffed in these concentrated animal feeding operations called CAFOs. The cereal grains grown to feed these animals are not the foods that they are normally meant to be eating. So the animals are injected with hormones and antibiotics just to keep them alive enough until they get slaughtered. Growing enough cereal grains in abundance to feed these livestock animals crammed into these CAFOs gave birth to a lot of different things, specifically like chemical farming, genetic modifications, and heavy pesticide use. The meat from these unhappy animals and grains are passed on to humans, and many people don't realize this. Most of these meats go to feed the masses a cheaper source of meat like those found in many fast food chains. Nowadays, a week doesn't go by when I don't hear livestock being blamed for the climate crisis. We are told not to eat meat if we want to save the planet. And this is so frustrating to me because all meat is not the same. When we are told this, there should be a disclaimer: don't eat meat from CAFOs. Meat from sustainably operated farms where humans are playing a role in helping livestock eat what they should be eating, rotating crops to save soil, making use of pollinators, and natural bug eaters like bats for pesticide control is a completely different meat than from one found in CAFO. In sustainable farms, the cows are happy, not sick, the land is happy, not contaminated, and the food is making people healthier and even happier. So the thought here is, in order to be healthier, have healthier livestock that lives on healthier earth, being more of a carbon sink than a carbon source, should humans and livestock be considered keystone species? This is just one of the topics in today's episode. Welcome back to Be Provided Conservation Radio. I am your host, Marcia Civic, and I am really excited today to be interviewing Miriam Kate McDonald, the author of Emergent, Rewilding Nature, Regenerating Food, and Healing the World by Restoring the Connection Between People and the Wild. In her book, McDonald explores how humans extracted from natural landscapes can be reintegrated to restore severed relationships with animals and the land. She discusses how regenerative farmers can help build soil, build nutrient-dense food, healthy, happy animals, and foster a renewed sense of kinship with communities. Welcome to the show, Miriam, and congratulations on the publication of your recent book, Emergent. I believe that was published in November 2022, correct?
Yeah, although it was a long time in the writing, so it seems very, although it's very recent, it doesn't feel very recent to me.
I bet. How long did it take you to research? It had to be a while. You include a lot of history, a lot of information.
I think I probably wrote it over 15 years without really realizing it was going to be a book.
That's great. So thank you for joining us from England. And I was just interested in the title a little bit, Emergent. I did a Google search on emergent strategy, and there's a lot of different definitions with kind of the same premise. So I just thought, for educational purposes for our listeners, can you tell us what that title means in relationship to your book and with some of this holistic restoration work that you're doing?
I spent quite a long time on the title and thinking about the title. And I chose Emergent because one of the themes of the book is from complexity, you get these unknown properties coming out, these emergent properties, and it seems like they sort of express themselves in every area. And I find that massively, massively hopeful, because we're in such a sort of a bad place globally with climate change and ecological collapse and stuff like that. that I find it massively reassuring that stuff emerges from complexity that can be brilliant and surprising and that you cannot predict at all. And it gives me a lot of hope that things can happen that can't be predictable. So I think I chose that to sort of, because it's my hope, basically, that that's what happens.
Yeah, things are only changing, and it's how we adapt to these changes, and things aren't always predictable, like you say. I'm a nutritionist and an environmental scientist, so your book touched two really important topics in my life, happy livestock, happy food, happy people, as well as bringing systems together. And I like how in your book, I think a big premise, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we as people or humans have separated ourselves from some of these ecosystems. And you can explain why. Maybe because we think we're more powerful, more intelligent, or we just have the ability to pluck things out and manipulate them to the way we want them to be, right? And that goes with farming and such as well. I heard on one of your podcasts a quote by John Muir, which I thought was a really good thing for your book. And the quote is, "When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe." And I like that you're wanting to bring humans more back into that landscape and how we shape things in a positive way. Did I describe that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely spot on. And I think it's a weird thing, isn't it, that this sort of like very peculiarly Western idea that you can separate anything, and that you can have an individual that can act in isolation from anything else. I think it's a bizarre idea looking at it, trying to step back from like a traditional Western view and sort of observing that. I think it's like a really weird place to start from, just a standard thing that's accepted. And I think my feeling is that there's a lot of, we run into a lot of problems because we start from this idea of separate entities, and that we can, and I think you see it a lot in like people who come up with the solution to climate change and focus on carbon or focus on methane, or come up with a solution to ecological degradation as fortress conservation or something. And I think they're all solutions to isolated problems, but in solving one thing you make other problems, because it's not just one problem that stands alone and we can just solve that one and then we can solve the next one, because they're all this complex connected whole. And I think it needs to be approached from a mindset of understanding complexity and understanding the interactions with things to approach something that, to sort of regenerate the whole system and attempt to restore the system as a whole and restore the balances in that system. And I think for me, that needs a fundamental shift in mindset from seeing things as individual entities that can act in isolation to seeing them as interconnected parts of a whole system. But then it touches on every aspect of life, doesn't it? As soon as you start to think of everything as this one interconnected whole.
Exactly. And this brings me to the question too, and I don't know if you want to talk about it, but in your book, and granted I read this a while ago, I'm sorry, we've been planning this for so long with all the different changes in weather and such, but I remember reading your journey into this holistic restoration. I think you mentioned that you started out in this conservation kind of mindset, like how I did probably with environmental scientists. You want to go out there, you want to change the world, you want to make things better, but then you realize things aren't all working together. I felt that with your background a little bit. You had some shifts. Do you want to talk about your transition into like what you're doing now and how you believe now?
Yeah, I think, I started I came like first ecology and then sort of conventional conservation. And I basically felt like, especially in Britain, where it's very, it's had an industrial system for so long, there's very little left that has any connectivity to any other area. Our reserves are very much isolated pools within very industrialized landscapes. And I felt like, I think it's really important to be preserving those reserves because they are holding the last fragments of populations and of species that are going extinct. And I think that's really, really good and necessary work. But it felt like there was no long-term future in that, because they all exist within a planet that's experiencing climate change. If you're on a 2-acre reserve, species can't shift in response to shifting temperature patterns because they're fenced into that reserve essentially. And I just felt like humans were going to keep pressing on those reserves in one way or another and undermining their ability to persist, because we have this extractive mindset of of wanting something and of always wanting something else. And I guess I started to think then why that was happening, like why we had the mindset and also why we were acting, how we were acting from that mindset. So I shifted sideways into agriculture to start to try and understand why agricultural systems were pressing so hard on wild systems, and why farming systems couldn't be just sustaining themselves and sustaining the people, sustaining us on a small, like on an area that isn't pressing on the rest of the world. And that led me into agriculture. And then I was really aware that, so I think farmers in general have a more utilitarian view of a landscape. And I started to see the landscape very much in those terms and saw the productivity of a landscape and how to enhance that productivity. And then I ended up looking at the landscape in two very different ways. One with this sort of like farming productive mindset, and the other with a conservation ecology mindset. And the two didn't mesh well at all. There was a lot of internal conflict. Like I was seeing very different things in the landscape, and my interaction with the landscape was very different depending on what I was seeing. And I got really interested in that and trying to unpick like why historically farmers view the land in one way and why historically conservationists view the land in another way. And is there a way of understanding how humans as a species are interacting with the landscape, sort of beyond the cultural narratives that we tell ourselves as a conservationist or a farmer, or whatever our sort of profession is, I suppose.
I think that's all really interesting. So how did we get to this place? Like, we started out way back, humans were really part of the land and farming sustainably, using the livestock properly for grazing. Then all of a sudden, well, we know why. I'm sure it's money and power and feeding the masses. But all of a sudden we go from these nice little farms doing what I think you like to see, using the grasses, becoming more of carbon sinks, right? Instead of methane producers, like these CAFOs out there with just so many cows that aren't living in the right systems. And it's just terrible. It's unhealthy. Is there a way that we can get back to that?
I think it is such a staggering amount of time, isn't it, when you start to peel back these layers? Because in Britain, you can trace a lot of the sort of industrialization of farming to the war years and ramping up production after the Second World War, especially. And then you can look what was happening before the wars. I was sort of unpicking this story, and I was going further and further and further back, and I found myself at the birth of agriculture. And then I was thinking, that's interesting. It's almost like agriculture implants a different interaction with the landscape. And then there are like a series of changes that happen from that. And I think it's really difficult to decide when it went wrong, because I don't think there was one sort of light bulb moment when people were like, oh, let's just make a right mess of all of this. It's just been this, like, it's a complex system again, isn't it? And there have been various people trying to do things for really good reasons that have interacted and created a situation that people have then responded to. And you get this really messy thing that over the years results in people getting more and more separated from land, like both physically in terms of what we do in our day-to-day lives, and also like emotionally and psychologically, seeing ourselves as distinct, and land becoming a recreational thing. And to my mind, I don't know, I'm sure there are lots of different ways of looking at it, but I sort of, coming from an ecologist, like training in ecology, and as an ecologist, I tried to look at humans as a species that were interacting in ecosystems to try and cut through all of the various like cultural framings of that, and all of like 10,000 year history of how that's evolved. And I found that really interesting, because Britain has got like a 900,000 year history of some species of human being in Britain interacting with the British landscape.
Yeah.
And as I was trying to understand what had happened, because it's 10,000 years of us making a mess, and then 900,000 years of something else, and I was trying to figure out what that something else was, and that information was really hard to find, and I thought that was interesting in itself, and also something that wasn't documented at all. It's like the amount of time that we've spent documenting stuff is even smaller than the amount of time that we've spent interacting with stuff, isn't it? And in our courses, we sometimes do this exercise, like the timeline exercise, where we draw out British history over a 900,000 year period, where you've got Homo heidelbergensis doing things, and then you've got the Neanderthals doing things, and then you've got the first humans arriving, and then only 6,000 years ago, you've got agriculture arriving, and then in the last 3,000 years, you've got permanent fields, and then really only in the last 50 years have we been doing industrial ag. And
that's such a small footprint. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And it really impacted me very much that a tiny percentage of the time we've been very detrimental, and the rest of the time we were something that was enhancing wild landscapes. And it's the culture that changed. It's not us biologically or anything that is like fixed about us. It's just our perception. And to me, that's really hopeful that something new could emerge from that, a new cultural understanding or a new way of interacting with landscapes.
Right now, as we exist today, especially here in the States, a lot of our useful land is either like a large soy crop or wheat crop. And there's still a little bit of a movement of getting the smaller farms out. I don't know if you've heard of Joe Salatin in Virginia, who's really promoting the small farm and the promotion of how grazers really help the ecology of the landscape. But there's really not enough Joels out there. We have these huge landscapes being used for things that really aren't beneficial wholly to us. I was hoping you could explain a little bit more about how livestock is beneficial and how they can help us regenerate some of these landscapes.
For me, it's about fitting livestock in where they belong in a farming system. So cows are an obvious example. They're not meant to eat grain, they're meant to eat grass and scrub and sort of browse through a landscape. And I think I think we do need to eat a lot less meat. I think we've got used to a really high meat diet, and I don't think for me, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't sit right. But I do think livestock can be blended into farming systems in a really beneficial way. And especially in Britain, I know Britain, but we don't have any large, like the biggest carnivore we've got is like a fox. We've got rabbits and hares and deer, but we don't have any megafauna left. And we used to have rhinos and elephants and lions in previous interglacials. And then in this interglacial, we had wolves and boar and beavers and stuff like that, and bear. And we also had wild cattle here and wild ponies. And so for me, I think this is one of the really good things that comes out of the rewilding movement, is this idea of substituting. Yeah, this idea that we can substitute certain species for other species. So Britain obviously grows vegetation really, really well because we're mild and wet, and vegetation just grows like wildfire. And that produces a lot of tree growth and a lot of scrub cover if you just let it go. But then if you have sheep, horses and cattle integrated into a landscape, they're browsing back that tree growth and creating dynamism within the landscape, so that you've got grasslands mixed in with scrubland and mature trees and wood pasture, and so you get a much more varied landscape, which can support our wildlife much better. And so I think our grazers have got a role in those landscapes, creating the environment that is sustaining our wildlife and also capturing carbon, because those scrublands are drawing down a massive amount of carbon. And then I think things like pigs are obviously creating the disturbance in that landscape, because they're going and they're turning the soil over, and then annual seeds can come and settle in, and then you're getting different plants in because you're having these small disturbances in the grass sward. And for me, farming is essentially just trying to steward that dance in some sort of way, trying to make sure that when we've got livestock in a system, they're at a level that's benefiting the landscape as a whole to evolve and creating this mosaic of different habitats. And I think that's that sort of an ecological role of a farmer, because in that role, a farmer is effectively playing the role of a wolf. Because we don't have wolves, and it's an incredibly contentious topic to talk about bringing them back into Britain. So I just don't even go there. A farmer is essentially playing the role of a wolf in pushing livestock around and in fencing livestock out of certain areas so that woods can regenerate. And then when they breed and there are too many of them, taking them off and eating them. And for me, that is a really ecologically solid way of integrating, of working with livestock to create a landscape that sustains livestock and sustains us and produces really high quality food for us. And the livestock get a really good, happy life, as close to a sort of a natural life as possible. So I would see livestock and also humans as a keystone species. So these like really powerful species in ecosystems that are like the wolves of Yellowstone are the classic example, aren't they? Where you introduce the wolves and then you get this trophic cascade that stabilizes a whole landscape. And I would see humans and livestock as keystones. And I think when you start to try and define a keystone, it all gets a bit muddy. But I think one of the strong things that comes out of looking at all the different keystone species is that they create landscapes that sustain them. Because if you're this really powerful actor in an ecosystem and you create a landscape that doesn't sustain you, you'll go extinct pretty quick. So I would imagine if there were like these negative keystones or whatever, they would have gone extinct and they're not here anymore. You could argue that an industrial human is a negative keystone. I think that farmers have this potential of being the keystone species that's maintaining a landscape that then nourishes them and supports them for the future. And I think regenerative farmers like Salatin at Polyface and stuff are heading in this direction. And that's the direction. So the farm, we've just taken on a farm to try and demonstrate what some of these landscapes might look like. So we're going to try and farm as a keystone species and see what happens.
You and your family, or you?
Me and my family, and also my business partner.
Oh, okay, great. So, wow. So when did you start doing this?
I've known the farm for a long time, and it's actually where I started writing the book, or it was where I just come out of conservation and I started working on this farm. So it's where I developed the dual eyes of the conservationist and the farmer. So it's quite interesting that we're back here now. But we've only had the tenancy of the farm since April. So it's very new.
I like the idea of the livestock and humans being keystone species. I've never really heard that before, and it's an interesting concept. And how farmers can act as the wolves, especially in your area where you don't have any of the big predators to manage that naturally as well. I thought that was really interesting. I like that concept.
Thank you.
As a nutritionist, I get the question all the time, and I don't know if you want to touch on it, but you mentioned we need to eat less meat. And I think if we are farming this way and we eat healthy in a smart way, I think all of us would probably consume less meat if we, but then you have to cut out all the fast food, all the big operators who are just putting just meat out, and it's not even healthy for us. But a lot of people ask me, should I be a vegan? Because that's going to have the most impact on climate change. I personally don't think that that's true. I think that we all do need to be smart on how we eat and shouldn't all be eating a ton of meat. But I mean, is veganism an answer to some of this to make change?
For me, I think, because, I get asked this quite a lot. What diet should I follow? And for me, it's that diversity is always best. Mm-hmm. So I think it's strange when you sort of get this concept of there being one diet that should fit everyone in all circumstances, sometimes globally. And I find that really weird, because for me, it sort of seems in one human body isn't the same as the next, and a person at one life stage isn't the same as, even in the same person at a different life stage. So I think we all do need different foods in different quantities. And I think that's just biologically how it is. And I think there's a thing, and I think livestock, when threaded through a landscape in an intelligent way, can be really beneficial. And I think if you've got livestock, you may as well eat them, because otherwise you're wasting a really high quality nutrient, like nutritious resource. But I think that it's quite difficult to follow a vegan diet if you're sort of stepping away from industrial food systems and highly processed food. You're automatically going back towards sort of grains, pulses, annual veg as the things that are sustaining somebody. And if you want to do that without fossil fuel fertilizers that sort of wash off and cause all sorts of problems in aquatic systems and stuff and degrade soil, you kind of need manure to be producing that veg. So I think that by some people eating meat, supporting farmers who are producing livestock that are producing manure, that then can fertilize vegetable production and grain production, you're like, the people eating the meat are supporting others to be vegan within that system. And by some people being vegan and not taking their slice of meat, people whose bodies perhaps need more meat can eat more meat. So for me, this diversity of diets creates a diverse landscape that's got all of these different types of food being produced in it, creating all of these different ecosystems, supporting a wider range of species than if we were just doing one diet. And it also feels inherently more future-proof. Not that anything could be future-proof. That if, like, I don't, in a climate destabilized world, I'm not sure I'd want to put all my eggs in any one basket. Yeah. So it's so for me, I think that a spread of different diets and people responding to what their body needs over their lifetime and over a season as well, I think is really, really powerful. So for me, it's all diversity.
I agree. I think, though, I think some people are misled. You hear news reporters saying, become a vegan, save the world, save the climate, but I don't think that's ideally the answer. You have to choose and be smart about what you're eating. And I do like the idea of happy cows do make happy people. You have a cow that's in its natural environment, grows up in this natural way of eating. Cow reaches a mature age, you eat it, you're kind of like the wolf, like you said, in that respect, kind of taking down the numbers of that so more can be produced. How can we get people in the mindset of this restorative kind of holistic restoration, like your business?
I think it's challenging, isn't it? The people who are sort of peddling the other argument are everywhere, aren't they? And they are so well funded, and it can feel like a uphill battle, can't it? For me, I'm not convinced. I know the landscape that I live in, but I don't want to say, oh, this is the right thing for a landscape that I don't live in or that I've never been to, sort of thing. So for me, it's always got to start from community, I think, and engaging with local community and trying to build a sense, because I think something that's been massively eroded is our connection to one another, isn't it? And it's also our connection to landscape. And I think I wouldn't have done any of this unless I had had experience of the natural world as a young person and then been powered by that, by wanting to protect that. So for me, it's like, it's got to start from giving people an experience of good food or wild landscapes or a sense of community in those places, and that feeling of wholeness that you can get from being within a landscape and interacting with the landscape. And I think that's one of the reasons why we started doing the farm, because we wanted to create a place that could blend the wild with regenerative production and could also incorporate people into that. I think in general, people have got quite this spend nothing but time, take nothing but photos, leave nothing but footsteps attitude to the wild, of like, oh God, it's brittle, hands off. And I think part of being a keystone species and part of stepping back into a relationship with the world has got to be this feeling that we can interact with it. And I think that builds community in a place through interaction with people and the land over time. And for me, I think that feeling of embeddedness in a place and care for a place like automatically alters how people think and feel and eat. And I think it's harder I think once someone's experienced that feeling, it's harder to then be dazzled by the latest McDonald's commercial or something like that.
Exactly.
So for me, it would be about that, like grassroots connection to community and connection to landscape, and trying to make those opportunities available to people.
That makes sense. Did like here, I discovered during the pandemic, one good thing about the pandemic and some of our lockdowns was a lot of people tearing out their lawns and putting in natural grasses for pollinators because they wanted to watch more birds and bees. Some people got chickens to raise, get their own eggs. And once they experienced the goodness of those eggs, they didn't want to go back too. But we did start to see, and it'd be nice if we could keep that going without the pandemic part of it. People are starting in these little postage stamp areas, their backyards, which is nice. And if we can get that connected in a community, I think that would be nice too. Did you see changes like that in England at all?
Definitely saw that. And I think for me, the pandemic bought us time, because I feel like in sort of average life, people don't really get the chance to sit still anywhere to observe if there are bees, or to observe sort of any interaction with the natural world at all. It seems to be, like mowing the lawn is just something that you have to get done really quickly, isn't it? Because you've got to get on to the next thing.
Right. It's got to look like the neighbors and look good.
We're all plugged into this really fast-paced life, aren't we? Of a lot of it dominated by competition. I definitely noticed people slowing down, and once they'd slowed down, noticing things that perhaps they would have just mown before. I think the same with community as well. I don't know what it was like over there, but there was sort of this. I was working as an organic grower at the time, so I was delivering a veg box because the people in food production didn't get shut down. So I was delivering the organic veg in totally deserted streets, and people were like cheering me. It was really weird.
You're their hero.
But that people were milling around on the streets and talking to each other, and that a car going through was an event. I thought that was really nice.
It is. Yeah. Are you going to be documenting the changes on your farm as they progress, how it interacts with people and the landscape? Is there another book in the future?
Possibly, yeah. I've got really interested in the human side of it, because I think Emergent is very much focused on the ecosystems and ecology side of it. And I'm getting increasingly interested in the human side of it. So the psychological effects of being in wild landscapes and interacting with sheep. So I think it will probably be more human focused. But given that it took me 15 years to write the last one, I don't imagine it will be a speedy thing.
No, well, that takes time. And boy, dealing with observing humans and psychology and behavior is a task for sure. So is there anything that you wanted to get across about your book?
This would be the time for shameless self-promotion, wouldn't it? My business partner always chastises me at the end of doing anything. So he's like, "Oh, you didn't mention this or that."
Yeah. How can we find your book? How can people find out more about some of your consulting work that you do with holistic restoration? Yeah, go ahead. Tell us all. Yeah.
Good points. Yeah. Yeah, the book's called Emergent, and it's available from the publishers, which is John Hunt. I think it's also on Amazon. I don't want to push people towards Amazon. And the project that we're running at the farm is called Woven Earth. So if you Google Woven Earth Midlands Restoration Hub, you should find the farm project.
Oh, good. Okay. I can post these links on the show notes too. So.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
And I interrupted you again. Is there anything else that you're doing that you want to promote?
I don't think so. I'm sure Rob, my business partner, would disagree, but I can't think of anything. I once got to the end of an 1.5-hour talk, and he said, "You didn't mention the book, holistic restoration, or the farm."
Just a quick question. Are you going to be offering tours of your farm? Like people to come visit and like you said, you're going to see how people interact with animals. I assume that means like the general public.
Yeah. So we're offering an array of different courses, all sort of aimed at restoration. So whether that's like landscape restoration, or restoration of food, or restoration of sort of community or mental health type things, offering an array of different ways for people to get involved. And then we also have community days up here. So people can come, and we've got a campfire, and basically people bring and share some food around a campfire.
Oh, fun.
So yeah, we're trying to make it quite an open place where people can come and get to know a landscape and engage in food production, or like wildlife surveys, or do some practical conservation type jobs. So ways to get involved.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I like it. And do you take donations as well for help, or is it all just are you doing just people coming in and volunteering for certain things and offering their services at all?
Currently, we've not done any donation things. It's an idea that keeps getting brought up, and we keep mulling it over, but we don't have a system for it yet. But yeah, it's something that we should probably push forward.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a lot to maintain. Tell us a little bit about like how many animals are on your farm and what you're growing. And
so we've only been here since April, and I'd got some dairy sheep. So my dairy sheep have come up here. There's only 10 here at the minute. And then we've got somebody else's cattle over winter, 6 cattle. And we're probably going to be buying in a couple in spring. And then we've got plans. So we're working with some growers who are setting up a vegetable enterprise up here, and they want that to be a community supported agriculture scheme. So members of the community coming in and helping grow food, and then getting a share of that veg in exchange.
Oh, that's great.
And yeah, and we're also going to be trialing growing grain up here. So it's not a traditional grain area. Nobody really does grain in the valley. It's very much grazing land. Okay. But historically, people have grown grain here. So we're going to try and grow grain grow like heritage varieties of grain that haven't been around for a very long time, and try and grow them in a quite an alternative way. So we're just going to do 1 2-meter wide strip of grain on contour, and hopefully do a lot of the processing by hand with the help from the local community.
Okay.
And we're also going to be getting some perennial crops in as well, so tree crops.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
How big is this place?
It's 160 acres.
Oh.
So I imagine tiny from American standards.
It's still a good size, though. I mean, yeah, that's great.
Enough to keep us all busy, I'd say.
Yeah, I bet. It was good to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, have a good evening. Here, Miriam. Thanks for all you do. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Yeah, and hopefully see you in person.
This ends today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Miriam's book, Emergent, can be found to purchase at johnhuntpublishing.com. Miriam's website is Holistic Restoration, all one word, so holisticrestoration.co.uk. And the website to her farm is Woven Earth, all one word, wovenearth-mrh.com. I will have more information about Miriam and some pictures of her farm in our show notes at beprovided.com. Music today was downloaded from soundstripe.com and is titled Back on the Farm by Andy Ellison. If you like what you hear and want to hear more shows like this, visit beprovided.com and drop us a line, leave a review, let us know how we're doing. Again, this is Marcia Civic of Be Provided Conservation Radio. Until next time, stay safe and stay healthy.